welcome. Really happy to be joined by Ted Suihkonen today. Ted is currently the Director of Player Development at HC Lokomotiv Yaroslav in Russia. He began his coaching career in America, coaching with USA Hockey, and moved to Sweden to work with the Swedish Ice Hockey Federation. He's also coached at clubs in Norway and Switzerland along his coaching journey. Ted has developed a new approach to player development that trains three speeds of hockey: speed of hand, speed of foot, and speed of mind simultaneously. This approach is rooted through the performance analytics that is gathered from skill and tactical sessions, as well as game footage of the players. He's also known as a very well-known social media antagonist, and we're honored to have him join us today. Thanks for joining us, Ted.
Thank you very much for having me on, David. It's an honor.
Well, let's start there. It wasn't meant as a shot, but I called you a social media antagonist, and that's how we connected online and the use of Twitter. Like, what do you see? I mean, you're active on there, and what do you see as social media's role for kind of discussion and sharing ideas? Like, how do you utilize it? What are you trying to gain out of your social media use?
Well, I think, obviously I haven't monetized it really at all, but it's more for me to just try to get my ideas out there and maybe, challenge the norm sometimes. And then, try to see if you got like-minded people that are thinking the same and try to build that community group in that way of thinking. But obviously there's still a lot of like the old school way of thinking sometimes, where it's in our professions that we are, it's the coach's way or there's no way, or if it's isolated and it's not like free play and stuff like that. Yeah. Where I think, sometimes when you can try to challenge that norm, you're going to find out, you're going to antagonize like you used, but you're going to see the differences in who's out there that's really out there to learn and maybe try to change their views or just try to see a different side of the point, or if they're just stuck in their ways and sometimes.
Yeah. Now, I've used it personally as a way to connect with people like yourself and through this project to kind of, ask for help, to kind of share some ideas. Like, do you have any examples where, things that you've gone through, online have kind of changed the way you've thought and kind of head you in a path where you're kind of looking into things in a different way?
Well, the whole thing behind Twitter and stuff like that, I could say, like, when I got into player development, I always thought it was like an isolated thing about skills, if you want to talk like in that way. Yep. And we see, like, in Canada, North America, especially here in Europe as well, where there's just been an explosion of skill coaches everywhere. Yep. Everybody's holding camps, everybody's doing stuff. And so, like, when we grew up and got into the coaching area, and there it was like, okay, let's break it down to skating, let's break it down to stick handling, and shooting and whatnot. And then just basically let the players kind of like figure out how they're going to use it within a game. So we're working a lot on the physicality part of it. Yep. And I think that's where the realm is today, is like everybody's thinking that if we just develop the player physically, it's going to be that way. And that's how I used to think as well. And actually there's Stuart Armstrong from the Talent Equation. Yep. And then Sean Mazaika, Movement Miyagi from yep. Minnesota. Those two guys are all about the, constraints of blood approach and like the ecological dynamics approach. And for me, just reading and listening to their podcast and when they're talking and stuff like that, that really started to change my view about, okay, it's not so much the physical part because we all got that down pat, but like, how do we get that mental side of it? And when you're talking about there, when I use that, the three things about hockey: speed of hand, speed of foot, speed of mind, that's actually taken from Anatoly Tarasov. That was his, big thing from the old Soviet Union when he started hockey here. Yep. And he was the pioneer in actually training all three speeds. And he was ahead of his time by a long shot.
For sure.
And when we look at it, we went from that and we try to change that with USA Hockey, with Herb Brooks and everybody else coming in there, and you start seeing this hybrid. And now we're going right back into this. Let's make these dynamically skilled players. And so we're seeing a lot of high skill, I believe, but we're not seeing a very high IQ part of it.
Now, you talked about Stuart Armstrong, and he's been, I would say another social media antagonist in terms of kind of driving this conversation. And I enjoy listening to his work a ton. What would you say is the biggest thing that's kind of holding that back? Like, what do coaches kind of have to get over to kind of get to that point where they're able to see the process like that, like he does, which is you build an environment and they kind of explore within it, and the development comes from that.
Well, I think it's just us. I think it's just us as a society, really. I mean, if you think about it, we're a society that needs to have hard numbers, hard facts, and you got to be able to see results ASAP, right? So, like, if we take sprinting and or just take a hard or shooting, for example, if we're talking about hockey, if I can see a kid that could shoot, say, 50 kilometers an hour, and then all of a sudden after a summer, just repeatedly working on it, he can hit 70. All okay. Now there's hard facts that worked,
Yeah.
right? And same thing if you're going to be doing a skating test or whatnot, you can do a forward stride and you can work with them for an entire week, and you can take that before video and then you can take that after video, and it's like, okay, he's perfect. But then again, he's perfect in an isolated event. Now, how does that really change? Like what Stu's talking about, how does that change to gameplay where the guys are actually having to use what they've learned in practice into the actual game to be a benefit?
Yeah.
And when we talk about that, I think the hard part is that, like, a lot of the environmental stuff, like if you're playing games or if you're putting them in situational areas where they're just having to perceive and then, do an action, it can look like chaos. And you can't really quantify exactly what they're doing and if it's really working. The end result may be coming later. It may take a while to develop to see the end result. And I think that's the part that doesn't drive home too quickly on a lot of people because they want to be able to see results today.
Yeah. So how do you get that balance down? I guess like if you're defining or building your kind of optimal learning environment from the athletic standpoint, like how do you get that balance where someone who isn't comfortable with that chaos, who isn't comfortable with the longer process? I mean that's it could be a volunteer coach or somebody where you're saying, here's how you build it, and here's some of the look fors that are going to help you feel comfortable that they are on a process to kind of getting this where they're building skills, hard techniques, yet they're able to transfer that into skill, which is kind of learning within that context of the game and, you know, nine other players and four officials and different things like that.
But everything is you have, like, in Canada with Hockey Canada, they got the long-term development model, right?
Yep.
Through Hockey Canada, for
Yep.
example. And then you have that within other sports and everything else. And I think the whole thing is that parents, coaches, and everybody, they got to understand that it is long term. It's a marathon, it's not a sprint, right?
Yep.
And what we talk a lot with coaches here and stuff too is that when you're building these kind of environments where you want the player to actually be in, you still got to be active as a coach, right? Because just because you built the environment where the kids are going to flourish inside of it and they're going to be doing stuff, you as a coach have to be active by really watching and observing these guys perform or these girls perform. And if they get done with the repetition, now you got to try to get some kind of feedback from them. And this is where we can have like a little bit of isolated technique blended inside of it, because if you see them and then they can bring you a problem back, like something happened, something didn't feel right, it did feel right. Well, now before their next rep, you do have that time to actually work on it within line or within the zone or something else like that, where you're able to blend the different areas. But what you see a lot sometimes is like what I think a lot of the perception is that if you're going to play games, you as a coach, you're a non-factor, right? So the game's going to teach itself, which in essence it does, because players don't necessarily need us to develop, right? They're going to have a rink, they're going to have a field, they're going to have a street. They can go outside and organize themselves with friends. They can play, they can practice on their own.
Yep.
That's where we as a coach, I believe we need to be able to step in there and offer something that's very positive for them. And when we come with information, it's got to be relevant to that person, which means I think I put out a tweet the other day as we have to be able to listen and we have to be able to observe. And when we have to, we're just a facilitator, right? So we can put things together, but the player themselves, we have to be able to communicate with them.
So what does that at Yaroslav, at Lokomotiv, what does that look like in practice? So, I can tell from our context that we have three coaches on the ice and we prescribe to this philosophy that, we're trying to create this environment that helps stimulate the learning and we kind of facilitate that, through feedback and questioning and that discussion with players. So how does it look like when you're running a session at Lokomotiv where, what are the coaches that you have a coach running things like what's the nuts and bolts of how that operates on a daily basis?
Like for myself, like if I just go off my practices, mine are a little bit a little bit special because I'm not like, I don't have like a full team on the ice. We break up our groups into groups of 5 or 7. And then it's myself and then my translator / he's like my mentee, I guess, if you want to call it that way. He's been with me now for 4 years here. So he's understood like what we're trying to get across. So what that'll look like is we'll usually have our iPads on the ice and they're on the stands and we'll be filming the drill or I don't like to use the word drill, but
exercise. I've tended to move to the word exercise or session.
Exactly. So like for that exercise or that session, that repetition, we'll be filming it. And the minute they come back, we'll get some feedback from them. Right. So there'll be like a little bit of a pause before that they're going to go again, obviously. And we'll just get some feedback about what they felt, what they didn't feel right.
Yep.
And then we'll just look at the tape real quick. So like the whole interaction is going to take about a minute.
Yep.
And then the feedback is very relevant towards them. And then we put them right back into it. Right. And what you see is like what we do is we use huddle and everything else like that. So we have all the players, and whenever we talk to them, we hit the record on the iPad. So it's recording our voices, and then we just email that to the player right after so that they actually have a hard copy of it as well.
Yep.
So that they're able to, maybe after practice, go back, re-listen to it if they didn't catch some stuff. And then maybe the next day come back in and ask some questions on the video. So it's like the learning isn't just that rep. It actually has a lifeline on it because it can be a week, it can be a couple of weeks. They can come back to it and everything else. So for us, it's very important that these players are able to get the hard copies. They're able to get that lesson plan and they can continually build off of that. And it's kind of the same, not to the degree of actually having video for our younger teams, because we have a lot of kids that are in the U15, U14 levels and all that. But on those practices, you got about 4 or 5 coaches, and they're breaking everything down into stations.
Yep.
And the one thing that we do see here a lot now that's changing is that there's a lot more communication. The players are actually coming out. You're seeing it from the younger ages as well, asking questions. The feedback from the coaches, they're always asking why all the time, just like a 3-year-old little boy would do.
Yeah, for sure.
Till you're blue in the face. But what you're seeing is that you're starting to get the understanding. The more that they can understand why they're going to be doing something, the easier it is for them to buy in and then try to do something you maybe want to change on them.
Now that's been, it's funny you say that, because that process of questioning and how to ask the right questions has been a focus of mine over the last couple of years, because I find that when we talk about, we try our best to create this environment where they're exploring and learning and being creative and kind of trying to find those solutions. And then we get to the discussion part or the feedback part, and we're just tell. And I think, my personal, wish for myself was to figure out ways, instead of telling, I don't know all the answers, but in most contexts, I can help get them the answer. So I've tried or strived to have a scenario where the questions I ask help them kind of arrive at that themselves. And is that part of your philosophy and kind of the philosophy that you've given to all the coaches that are in your crew of guys?
Yeah, you kind of want you kind of want, like you're saying there, you want to guide the player to something where you don't want to give them that direct answer about exactly what you were trying to achieve from what you had out there. So you're trying to guide them towards that. But I found it very interesting is like, I always look at when we're questioning players, there's a movie called Vantage Point. I don't remember if you've ever seen that, but
seen that one.
It's an interesting movie, not a great movie, but it's interesting. And there was an assassination, but there's 3 different vantage points from how the assassination happened. So the story gets retold from each one.
Yep.
And so I tell the coaches, I go, you have to be able to think. We can look at something and we can say this is wrong because we didn't see what we wanted to see. We saw what we saw and they did something different. Well, what we want to get into the player's head. Well, what did he see? Because his decision that he made to do that play was based off of what was in front of him at that point of time. Maybe he didn't see the open space. Maybe he didn't see the pass, but we have to get in there first. So we need to get his vantage point to be able to understand why he made the decision he did. And then we can go back and we can work backwards onto what we saw and then you can kind of come to a conclusion where, all right, here's what you could have done a little bit different.
Yeah, and that's it's good you say that, because I find that video is obviously such a powerful tool, and we utilize it a ton. Is that's the one soft spot in video, is that for a coach watching video and trying to determine decision making, you're still using your context applied to the player to say, hey, that's a mistake. And I think that's important to understand, is that, you need the context of what the player thinks or feels or saw in that situation, and kind of have that discussion. I think that's really essential when it comes to using video, that it doesn't become this kind of autocratic tool where now you're still telling the player exactly what they need, what they, you think they should hear.
Well, take the video, for example, there. That's the third vantage point, right? So that video is usually taken from above, top of the arena, right? So now that's where the scouts sit. That's where the mom and dad sit, the player agents.
Yeah.
And they're seeing it from a completely different view than you and I on the bench see it. And then they're seeing it from a completely different view than what the players on the ice seeing it. So all of a sudden, the space that we thought was open from the coaching point was big. Now it gets higher up and you're like, oh my God, look how much time he actually did have.
Yeah.
So like the one part that we like to do with the video is that if we're cutting the players' clips from the game, we have all their shifts, is we'll just pull out clips that we think, okay, this is a teaching point, for example, from a game. But I'm not going to say a word. We're going to play it, and you're going to tell me what you were thinking, what you thought you had in front of you, why you did what you did. And then we're going to work backwards on that.
Yeah. Now, do you use Huddle for this process? Because we're Huddle users as well, and done something similar to that in the past. But are you using the chatting function within the playlists and how to build that conversation online? Is that something you guys do?
No, we haven't utilized that yet, because the Russian English is not the greatest over here with that. But so whenever we have like a one-on-one meeting with the player himself, or we'll put the group of forwards together. So if we kind of group things, if we start seeing like patterns between different players, we'll put them together for a learning environment on that.
Okay. Now you mentioned parents. And so, I'm interested, like I can speak to the role of parents culturally, I would suggest, in North America. In Canada, the US is very similar in that sense. But what's the role of the parent in this process and in Russia? And would you say, you've been there, you said, I think 4 years, from people who are, native Russians, would they suggest that things are different than they were, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago? So, where do you see the role of the parent in your club and in Russia in general?
In Russia, it's pretty much non-existent, right? Because here in Russia, the role of the parent is bring the kid to the rink.
Right.
That's it. Yep. The rest of it's taken care of by the club, right? So like parents, they can't, like in our club, for example, they can't watch practices.
Yep.
They're not allowed inside the rink. They're allowed to bring the kids to the rink. And this is pre-COVID as well.
Yep.
They're allowed to bring the kids to the rink. If they're small, like my son, who's 7 and, everything else like that, you can go into the locker room, you can tie their skates and blah, blah, blah. And then that's it. And then pick them up in 90 minutes.
Yep.
And we're kind of like special here in Russia because all of our coaches from under 7 all the way to the pro, they're all full-time coaches.
Yep.
So if you're an under 7 coach, that's your under 7 team. So you're fully on with them. And coaches give feedback, to the parents and everything about how the kids are doing. But what you do see here is that it's a lot less tense with the parents and the kids, because the kids are very much they're pretty free when they get to the rink. There's nobody watching the games. Or the practices and stuff like that. So their attention's on the ice, where in Sweden, in Norway, parents can go there and you'll see the kid if you have him on practice or you have him at a camp and you're trying to explain something to him. And he's up in the stands looking at his dad.
Yeah.
Because his dad's giving him instructions from the stands sometimes, right? Or from behind the glass. Where here it's like it's the coach's role. They're a full-time coach, and it's they're respected like a teacher would be in school.
And from your experience, you've mentioned the word focus. I don't think you said focus, but you find that the player is more intentional with what they're doing because they're able to focus on the task at hand. And you find that's the case.
Oh yeah, it's like it's regiment, right? I mean, coach blows a whistle, boom, kids are right at your skates right away.
Yeah.
There's no pucks being shot around. There's no anything else. Kids are in line. You know, they're not really screwing around at all. Like kids will be kids at times and stuff like that, obviously, and we allow that to an extent. But when you're looking at the kids, like their eyes are on you right away.
Yeah.
And when you're trying to show something, their eyes are on you, and they're not afraid to ask you to repeat it again for them.
Yeah. And so I guess, talking about kids too, like the framework for ages, like around, at your club, how detailed does that feedback process get, and at what age? When are you really pushing it to the players to start really thinking about rather than just doing what they're doing?
For us, it's probably around the U11 age.
Yep.
10 years old and stuff like that. Like, the U7s, the U8s, the U9s, it's pretty much go out there. We'll work on some technique stuff. We'll have a lot of fun. It's just keeping them involved, keeping them in there, and just seeing how they progress. And, around that U11 age, they start to a little bit, now we start talking a little bit more, not tactical schemes, but in the fact where does F1, F2, F3 go? How do you fill lanes? Where should the high guy be? Can you count in front of you? Like starting to understand about the framework of the game that you want to be able to play as a club.
Yep.
But it's pretty freewheeling in a sense where, nobody says that the right wing is going to be here and the left wing is going to be there. It's more like, okay, if you got guys are already being creative in the sense where they're already going to be turning and crisscrossing, can we count and can we fill the lanes?
Yeah.
And the defense, man, can you jump up? And if he jumps up, can you back him up? It doesn't matter who it is, but just be able to fill. And
that process, so you say U11, that's something that happens at training, at practice, and as they get older, the feedback process becomes more detailed, obviously.
Correct.
To get outside of that and whatnot.
But the U11, it's more like about like, okay, what are your roles? Like if you're the first guy in, what should you be doing? Like, Do you understand the net's there? Do you want to cut the defender off? Okay, great. If you can see that, where's F2 going to be? Where's F3 going to be?
Yep.
And then obviously as we get older and stuff like that, it becomes a lot more detailed into that. But it's just the framework. It's just getting the ideas into the kids' heads, and not like a set rule about everything, but obviously, things can change, but just getting them to understand the concepts of within the game.
Right. And I guess in terms of that, like when you think about that process of building feedback and how granular it gets as they get older, how do you, from your experience, how do you build in the willingness of the player to kind of cooperate in that? Like some players are more giving, they're able to kind of, think a little bit more deeply about themselves. Like they have a good, realization of who they are and what the situations are. Like, how do you build in that cooperation from your experience of getting the majority of players to kind of buy into that whole process that, this feedback is important. We care what you feel because we want to help build you as a better player, better person.
Well, it's kind of fun because, like I said, I've been here for 4 years, right? So the first year being here, them getting this kind of like instruction and this kind of feedback from a coach was kind of non-existent, really. It was more like coach would be like, this is what you're going to do. That's what you're going to do. So it's kind of like that old kind of thought process you have of like maybe that Russian mentality, just like the army straight ahead, right?
Yep.
But by being able to break through that barrier and actually showing the players that you actually care for them, finding out different things about them, not just the hockey part, but their off life, their off ice lifestyle a little bit, and being able just to have a normal conversation. All of a sudden, when you can break that barrier, what I noticed here was that once you broke that barrier, they were more receptive into you. Once they started seeing results, I didn't have to go to the next group that was coming in, like say for the next year. I didn't have to go to them and try to beg for them to listen and do stuff. The older guys would already talk to them. The older guys would already, it's like that word of mouth, right? So if something happens, it just goes. And then when you start seeing the results of the other guys, and all of a sudden now it just starts building up throughout the club.
Right.
So we got guys now from, 4 years ago that were U13, U14 age group now, and they're coming up into our junior ranks, and they're already mentally prepared for what we're going to give them because they've already been speaking, they've already been seen, they've already been, part of this in a sense.
Right.
But it's just, to be honest, you just have to be genuine.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes sense. That from your experience, I guess, like from my perspective, you think about the Russian athlete, and you mentioned it, like put your head down, go straight forward. Here's A, B, C, D. You do these 4 things, and we'll have success. And they've been very successful at that. And now within that, which is, you mentioned Yaroslav at the beginning, that they were able to create this kind of artistry and kind of this beautiful way of playing, even though on the outside it would be very regimented, but it's kind of it's a structure, but within the structure there's a lot of freedom within that. So right. My question to you would be, from that experience in the last 4 years, where you're kind of doing things a little bit differently than probably traditionally have been done, what's been the pushback of your fellow coaches? Like, you mentioned you had kids from 11 now are moving into the U18 and the U20 teams. Like, you've obviously created the culture of this happening. Has that been a process to kind of help educate the coaches as to, we're going to do things a little bit differently that maybe not are as traditional as, you've done in the past?
Well, I think there has been absolutely zero pushback. None. Once again, I believe you come in and it doesn't matter. I'm coming in for, I'm a North American. I moved to Sweden, so I had to fit into that system as well. And then I come over here. So for me to come over here, I have to, I'm not trying to take anybody's job. I'm not trying to do anything like that. So I'm not trying to be a threat. So the main thing is you just become friends. You try to, understand that we're both in this together. Yeah. We're both trying to help one another. And what it's come out to be is the Russian mentality is that you tell somebody to do something, they're going to do it. Yeah. There's no days off for them. If they're on the ice, they're on the ice. If they're in the gym, they're in the gym. They're going to give you 120% every single time. The process is okay, how do we make that 120% even better? Right. So how do we sweeten that pot? How do we get even more out of the player to help them in the future? And what you've seen is text messages and Instagram messages, DMs and everything else from the coaches within the club and stuff like that. Just everybody's asking for advice, which is perfect, what you want. And I ask for advice from those guys too, because they have younger teams as well. Yeah. So it's kind of like that network where you want to be in it because we're all in it for the common goal. Right. So our common goal is to take a kid that just starts at the hockey school level, so at the U7, U6 level. And our goal is to make that player into a KHL player. It's our feeder system here. Yeah. So we want to grow them all the way up. Well, in order to do that, we all have to work together.
Right.
And, within our club, they call it a family club in the sense, because once you're inside of it, you're there for life if you're there doing the right things. So if you're a U7 coach, you may go U7, you may fall that team U8, U9, U10, and then you drop back down to the new U7 crops, and then the new coach will be able to kick it in, and then they'll be able to, you just recycle. But, our jobs as coaches are defined, and what our goal is to make sure that our players are developing. So I really believe that when you can come in there with honest intentions and be honest and bear what you want to get out of it, is very nice for everybody else, because now we're all on a common ground.
Right. I'm happy to see that, because I know the beauty of sport in general. You're American by way of Scandinavia in Russia. That hockey is that kind of unifying thing, or sport in general, that helps unify kind of different cultures and whatnot. And it's good to hear that process happens, and the coaches, you're sharing ideas and you're collaborating, and that's one of the big things as coaches, is that if we're asking our players to be in this environment, to give us feedback, to be aware of who they are and what their deficiencies are and what their strong points are, that we should hold our coaches to the exact same standard. So it sounds like you guys have been able to kind of strike that balance of the culture is just not meant for the players, it's meant for everybody.
Well, I think that also, that's the ego part of it, right? I mean, what do you really want as a coach? You have to seriously ask yourself, what is it that you really want out of your profession? Whether you're a volunteer coach or whether you're a full-time coach, you have to understand what you really want out of it. Are you trying to climb the ranks? Are you happy with just developing players? Like what role is it that you want? And if you can find that role and you can be honest with yourself with exactly what it is that you want in it, then you can go full steam into it. Because you're not going to be worried about somebody else taking your job because you're doing what you're supposed to do.
Yeah.
If you're always trying to say like I don't know, for example, if I'm a U16 coach, okay, I want to be a U18 coach. That's my next gig. When I get there, I want to be a CHL coach or for example. Yeah. And from there, I want to get into the East Coast League, or I want to get into the American League or the NHL. Well, once again, your ego is going to have to go push back a little bit. If that's your goals, well, then you got to be able to find people that have already taken those kind of routes, and you got to learn from them because you're going to have to collaborate. Well, in order to do that, you're going to have to collaborate with the people that are underneath you. So if I'm a U16 coach, I still got to collaborate with the U14 coach because those are my next players coming up. Right. And I got to be able to share the wealth of knowledge I've gained from other people that I've talked to or mentored under or whatever. And I got to be able to help that coach out, because if I can help him out, he's going to help me out later on. Yeah. So it's always a help. But if you're selfish about it, where you're the ego, where it's just like, what my way is, this is what I'm thinking, this is how it's going to be done, you're going to be very limited in what you're going to be able to do. And you probably will bounce back, but you're not going to reach your potential in that. It's the same thing that we tell players.
Yeah, that's great. I think I really appreciate. I mean, you talked about sharing and using your knowledge, and today has been awesome. I think it's anytime I can get perspectives from coaches who are on the front lines and in a professional club, I think it's going to be, and Yaroslav, gets a really good name globally, I think, in terms of the structure you guys have and the things that they're able to do for the individual player. And it's not only a well-known Russian club, I think it's a well-known global club that's, doing a really good job. So I appreciate you for sharing your expertise, your knowledge, and continue that sharing process that you mentioned. Really appreciate it.
I'll try. I appreciate you having me on. Thank you.